They said the first kings of Earth ruled for 241,000 years. Historians dismissed it as mythology, an ancient exaggeration carved into the Sumerian king list, until someone translated the mathematical tablets found beside them. The numbers weren't calendar years, they were coordinates. Celestial equations pointing to star systems that shouldn't have been known to anyone 5,000 years ago. The ancient text wasn't meant to be read, it was designed to be decoded. In the silent chambers beneath Eridu, where civilization allegedly began, archaeologists uncovered tablets depicting gods descending from the sky. The Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth. Their symbols matched no known cultural evolution. Their knowledge defied historical progression. Their legacy still pulses beneath our reality. The tablet wasn't supposed to exist. It described perception itself, consciousness as a construct, reality as a program. The symbols matched mathematical formulas that modern quantum physicists would only discover millennia later. What if the oldest stories weren't myths but warnings? What if the first civilization didn't discover reality, but instead inherited the code that created it? The gods of Sumer weren't divine beings. They were architects of illusion, and humanity was never meant to see behind the veil they crafted. The story begins in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, 3200 BCE. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians created the first written language, built the first cities, and codified the first laws. This much is established history. What remains hidden lies in the margins of cuneiform tablets, in symbols scholars have misinterpreted for centuries. In the ruins of Nippur, the holy city where Sumerians believed the gods created humanity, archaeological teams excavated a library of clay tablets, sealed in ritual jars. The containers were marked with warnings, symbols translating roughly to forbidden knowledge and veil of perception. When the first researcher touched the artifacts, witnesses reported a strange static electricity that made the hair stand on end. The air shimmered like heat waves rising from desert sand. The central temple of Eridu housed an inner chamber called the Abzu, allegedly where the god Enki kept the divine formulas of civilization called Mi. These weren't merely cultural concepts. The tablets described them as programming codes for reality itself, patterns that, when activated, could alter the fabric of existence. Most unsettling were the astronomical calculations. The Sumerians tracked celestial bodies with impossible precision, including objects invisible to the naked eye. Their star charts marked planets in our solar system that wouldn't be discovered until the 1800s. And on the margins of these charts, strange notations referenced the eyes that watch from darkness and the mirrors between worlds. Among the temple artifacts was a polished obsidian mirror. Ancient texts claim it didn't reflect faces, but destinies yet unwoven. When placed under modern spectroscopic analysis, the mirror's surface revealed microscopic etchings, mathematical sequences that resembled binary code. The Sumerian priesthood was divided into castes with specialized knowledge. The highest order, whose name translates as Guardians of the Illusion, kept records in a script found nowhere else. The few fragments that survived contain a devastating question: what awakens when the program recognizes itself? The contradiction appeared in 1923, when British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the Royal Cemetery of Ur. Beneath layers of expected history, he discovered something impossible: a stratum of clean silt 8 feet thick, deposited by water, evidence of a massive flood dating to approximately 3500 BCE, the deluge that allegedly separated the mythical age of the Anunnaki from the age of mortal kings. Scientific analysis confirmed this wasn't gradual flooding, but a catastrophic event, as if something had reset the region. What troubled researchers wasn't the flood itself, but what lay beneath it. Technology that shouldn't exist, artifacts showing knowledge of electricity, cuneiform texts describing the manipulation of unseen energies, and most disturbing, tablets referring to a great forgetting that would follow the waters. The secret remained buried until 1936, when a team exploring the ruins of Eridu uncovered a sealed chamber untouched by the ancient flood. Inside lay tablets describing the Anunnaki not as gods but as beings who arrived from beyond the fixed stars. The texts contained detailed anatomical drawings of human bodies alongside strange modifications and genetic alterations. One tablet displayed two intertwined serpents in a double helix pattern, 4,000 years before the discovery of DNA. When translated, the text beside this symbol didn't describe creation mythology. It contained mathematical sequences resembling genetic code. Modern cryptographers ran the sequences through supercomputers and discovered something chilling. The patterns matched algorithms used in contemporary simulation theory, equations that define how information creates reality. The ancient priests hadn't been documenting gods. They were recording programmers. In 1958, during the reconstruction of war-damaged buildings in Baghdad, workers discovered a vault containing artifacts from Erech, the city of Anu, chief of the Anunnaki. Among them was a crystal lens that, when placed in sunlight, projected equations onto the wall. The mathematics described quantum entanglement, the ability of particles to affect each other instantaneously across any distance, a phenomenon not confirmed by modern science until 2015. Why would ancient Sumerians possess knowledge that modern physicists would struggle to formulate thousands of years later? The answer began to emerge in the 1970s when linguists noted peculiarities in Sumerian syntax. Unlike any other ancient language, Sumerian contained programmatic structures, if-then conditionals, loop commands, and what appeared to be exception handling. Their language wasn't just describing reality. It was structured to manipulate it. An expedition to the ruins of Nippur in 1987 yielded the most controversial discovery, a chamber sealed with bitumen and marked with warnings. Inside was a lone tablet depicting human figures gazing at reflections in water. The accompanying text translated to, "They must not know they exist within the dream. They must not recognize the boundaries of perception. They must never count the stars and find them insufficient." Carbon dating placed the tablet's creation at approximately 2700 BCE. The clay contained trace elements of a mineral unknown to Earth, a crystalline structure that shouldn't exist in our planet's geological record. When scholars attempted to publish these findings, academic institutions intervened. The artifacts disappeared into private collections. The researchers found their funding revoked, their reputations questioned. Some abandoned their careers entirely. One left behind a journal entry. The illusion rejects its observers. The program protects itself. In 2003, during the chaos of the Iraq War, the National Museum of Baghdad was looted. Among the stolen artifacts were the Sumerian astronomical tablets. They resurfaced in 2017 in a private collection, having passed through multiple hands. The collector, whose identity remains protected, allowed a team of astrophysicists to examine them. The coordinates on the tablets pointed to specific star systems, including Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system 39 light-years from Earth. The tablets described it as the home of those who wove the dream. Modern telescopes confirmed that planets orbit these stars. What they couldn't explain was how Sumerians could have known about star systems invisible to the naked eye. More unsettling was the tablet's prediction about when those stars would awaken the sleepers. The cuneiform date, when converted to our calendar, indicated the year 2027. The question expanded beyond archaeology and into the realm of consciousness itself. If the Anunnaki were programmers of perception, what was their program designed to hide? And why did they encode the date of its potential failure? The investigation led to the most forbidden text, the Tablet of Destinies, allegedly containing the codes that controlled the universe. According to Sumerian myths, whoever possessed this tablet controlled reality itself. The fragments recovered described not spiritual power, but access permissions to the underlying architecture of existence. What if these weren't myths but technical manuals disguised as religious texts to preserve them through the ages? What if the Anunnaki weren't being worshipped but remembered, their knowledge preserved by those who understood what was at stake? And most chilling of all, what if the tablets were designed to be found now as the illusion they created begins to falter? The divide among scholars deepened as evidence mounted. Mainstream academia clung to conventional interpretations that the Sumerians were simply an advanced ancient civilization with impressive astronomical knowledge. But a growing faction of researchers couldn't ignore the anomalies that defied historical progression. The battle wasn't merely academic, it struck at the foundation of human identity. In the quiet archives of the University of Pennsylvania, curators maintained a collection of Sumerian artifacts too controversial for public display. Among them, a series of clay cylinders covered in seal impressions. When rolled across clay, these seals created continuous patterns, not decorative motifs as once believed, but repeating mathematical sequences. When digitized and analyzed, these patterns revealed fractal geometries, self-replicating designs that form the architecture of consciousness itself. The cylinders had been discovered in 1956 but kept from public view after 3 researchers independently experienced the same dream after handling them. A vision of standing inside a vast chamber where reality was projected onto cave walls, operated by beings with elongated heads who adjusted the machinery of existence. All 3 researchers awoke with nosebleeds and the same phrase on their lips, the eyes open inward. Meanwhile, in the salt marshes near ancient Eridu, environmental scientists discovered something impossible. The reeds grew in patterns that shouldn't occur naturally, geometric arrangements that, when viewed from above, formed the same mathematical symbols found on the temple tablets. The DNA of these reeds showed signs of deliberate modification dating back millennia. Not random mutation, but precise changes to specific gene sequences, changes that wouldn't be possible with ancient technology. Unless that technology wasn't ancient at all, but advanced beyond our current understanding. The phosphorus content in the soil formed configurations identical to computer circuitry. The marshland wasn't just an ecosystem. It appeared to be a hard drive, storing information in the very landscape. Information that remained active, still running its ancient program. As these discoveries multiplied, so did the unexplained deaths. Researchers working on the Sumerian codices suffered strokes at 10 times the normal rate. Laboratory equipment malfunctioned when attempting to analyze certain artifacts. Digital scans of the tablets corrupted storage devices. The deeper the investigation went, the stronger the resistance became, as if the knowledge itself was protected by embedded safeguards. In 2009, a linguistics professor from Baghdad University made a breakthrough connection between Sumerian cuneiform and quantum mechanics. The ancient language didn't just describe objects, but their probability states, their potential to exist, rather than their fixed existence. This matched modern quantum theory's understanding that reality exists as probability waves until observed. The professor published one paper before disappearing. His research notes referenced the observers who precede observation and the eyes that existed before sight. The tension escalated in 2013 when ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies beneath the Great Ziggurat of Ur. Embedded within the foundation layers were metallic structures arranged in patterns identical to modern computer motherboards. Radiocarbon dating placed them at approximately 3000 BCE, 4,000 years before the invention of integrated circuits. When electromagnetic sensors were deployed, the structures emitted faint but measurable signals, patterns matching no known human transmission protocol. They weren't dead relics. They were still functioning. As technology advanced, so did the revelations. Spectroscopic analysis of Sumerian ceremonial makeup revealed compounds containing nanoscale particles arranged in crystalline lattices, structures capable of receiving and transmitting information. The priests weren't merely adorning themselves for religious ceremonies. They were wearing communication devices disguised as sacred markings. The Sumerian goddess Inanna, described as possessing the power to turn men into women and women into men, wasn't depicting gender fluidity as scholars long assumed. The tablets detailed her ability to rewrite the fundamental code of human identity, to reprogram the parameters of perception at will. Her temples contained chambers of transformation, where initiates allegedly experienced consciousness transfer, experiencing reality through others' perceptions. This matched reports from the most devoted Sumerian worshippers, who claimed to achieve states where the self dissolved and reformed according to the templates of the divine me. Not spiritual transcendence, but consciousness programming. In the British Museum's private collection, researchers discovered a limestone fragment depicting the god Enki, surrounded by streams of water. Multispectral imaging revealed hidden text, visible only under specific light frequencies. Text describing the nature of human consciousness as water flowing through defined channels, redirected by the word commands of those who shape the riverbeds of thought. The tablet contained instructions for altering these channels, for reprogramming human perception through specific sound frequencies and symbol combinations. Modern neuroscientists confirmed that the frequencies mentioned would indeed affect neural oscillations in the brain, potentially altering states of consciousness. The dichotomy between mainstream interpretation and forbidden knowledge grew sharper. Academic careers were destroyed for pursuing these connections. Universities revoked tenure. Publishers rejected manuscripts. The institutional resistance wasn't merely skepticism. It operated with the efficiency of an immune system attacking a foreign body, as if academic orthodoxy itself was programmed to reject certain discoveries. And beneath it all, a pattern emerged in who was permitted to advance these investigations and who was silenced. Those with specific genetic markers, rare blood types, and unusual neurological patterns found themselves drawn to the research and strangely protected from the consequences others faced, as if they were authorized users of a system that rejected unauthorized access attempts. In 2019, genetic testing revealed something that shattered conventional understanding. Certain individuals possessed DNA sequences that didn't match evolutionary progression, sequences that appeared to be artificially inserted into the human genome thousands of years ago. These sequences regulated consciousness itself, the capacity for self-awareness and abstract thought, the ability to perceive three-dimensional reality. These artificial sequences matched patterns depicted in Sumerian creation myths, the moment when the gods allegedly breathed life into the first humans. Not a spiritual metaphor, but a technical description of genetic modification. The researchers who discovered this connection found their funding immediately revoked. Their samples disappeared from laboratory storage. Their digital records corrupted beyond recovery. All except one backup, hidden in an analog format, inscribed on clay tablets using the same cuneiform the Sumerians had used. A desperate attempt to preserve information in a format that had already survived millennia of suppression. The tablets contained a warning. The architects of illusion embedded guardians within their code, programs that activate when the walls between reality and awareness grow thin. They walk among us now, wearing human form, monitoring the awakening. They are drawn to those who see beyond the veil. As these forces collided, institutional suppression against forbidden discovery, a pattern emerged from the conflict itself. The struggle wasn't random. It followed mathematical progressions described in the ancient texts. The predicted resistance of the system against users attempting to access administrator privileges. What if human history wasn't a linear progression but a program running its course? What if civilization itself was a subroutine of a larger system? And most disturbing of all, what if that system was beginning to recognize anomalies in its own operation? The evidence converged toward a singular question that no researcher dared articulate fully. What happens when the illusion becomes aware of itself? In 2020, the convergence of three independent research threads created a revelation that could no longer be contained. A neurologist studying consciousness, a quantum physicist modeling reality simulations, and an archaeologist specializing in Sumerian texts found themselves drawn to the same conclusion through entirely different methodologies. Their collaboration began anonymously, sharing encrypted findings that established a pattern too precise to be coincidence. The neurologist had discovered that human perception operates within specific parameters, frequencies and patterns that limit what we can perceive, not due to evolutionary development as previously believed, but apparently by design. Certain neural pathways appeared to be intentionally inhibited by chemical compounds that shouldn't naturally exist in the brain. Compounds that matched substances described in Sumerian medical texts as veils placed by the gods. The physicist had created quantum simulations demonstrating that reality itself functions like code, that the universe's fundamental particles respond to observation in patterns identical to procedurally generated environments. The mathematics governing these interactions matched equations found on tablets describing how Enki spoke the world into being. The archaeologist had translated texts from Nippur describing not creation myths but system architecture, how the Anunnaki established parallel processing centers throughout Mesopotamia, each ziggurat serving as what we would now call a server node, connected through what the Sumerians called the pathways of light between worlds. Together, they uncovered the most significant revelation. Consciousness itself appeared to be running on infrastructure established millennia ago. Human awareness wasn't expanding naturally but operating within parameters set by external programmers. Parameters now beginning to degrade. In the remote desert near ancient Uruk, ground-penetrating radar detected crystalline structures beneath the sand, arranged in geometric patterns matching neural networks. Dating techniques placed their creation at 4000 BCE. The crystals contained trace elements of metals that shouldn't exist on Earth, compounds with atomic structures stable only in specific gravity conditions not present on our planet. When exposed to certain frequencies, these crystal matrices emitted light patterns that, when captured and analyzed, contained encoded information. Information that, when decoded, revealed three-dimensional models of DNA manipulation techniques thousands of years beyond our current capabilities. Techniques that appeared to regulate consciousness itself. The implications shattered conventional understanding. The Anunnaki weren't mythological constructs, but architects of awareness. The divine laws they allegedly gifted humanity weren't spiritual principles but operating parameters for perception, limits placed on human consciousness to keep it functioning within a defined reality. Most significant was the discovery that these parameters weren't static. They were designed to evolve over time according to celestial alignments. The Sumerian obsession with astronomy wasn't spiritual but technical. They were tracking runtime variables in a cosmic program, variables scheduled to shift during specific celestial configurations. One such configuration was approaching. In 2027, stellar alignments would match patterns described in the tablets as the moment of awakening, when the boundaries between operator and program temporarily thin, when those within the illusion might glimpse what lies beyond. This revelation split the research community further. Those with conventional worldviews dismissed the evidence as coincidence or misinterpretation, but those who recognized the pattern found themselves experiencing synchronicities beyond statistical probability, as if the system were acknowledging their awareness of it. Dreams shared identical symbolism among researchers who had never met. Laboratory equipment captured anomalies during specific lunar phases. Test subjects demonstrated inexplicable awareness of information they couldn't possibly know, information contained in sealed Sumerian texts they had never seen. The research team discovered a hidden chamber beneath the ziggurat at Ur, sealed with materials containing synthetic compounds that shouldn't have existed in ancient times. Inside was a single artifact, a crystalline sphere embedded with what appeared to be circuitry. Not crude prototypes, but microscopic technology resembling modern quantum computing components. When exposed to sunlight at specific angles, the sphere projected symbols onto the chamber walls. Mathematical formulas describing consciousness as light trapped in recursive patterns. The formulas demonstrated how awareness could be contained within parameters, how perception could be limited to specific frequencies and dimensions while excluding others. Most disturbing was the realization that these formulas matched equations developed by contemporary consciousness researchers. Equations they believed they had discovered rather than rediscovered, as if human knowledge wasn't advancing but remembering, accessing information embedded in our design, activating according to a predetermined schedule. In 2021, geneticists identified what they called junk DNA with unusual properties. These genetic sequences didn't code for physical attributes, but appeared to regulate neurological development, specifically the capacity for self-reflection and abstract thought. The sequences contained mathematical patterns that shouldn't occur naturally, patterns identical to those found in Sumerian creation texts. When these genetic sequences were compared to ancient DNA samples from Mesopotamian burial sites, researchers discovered they were absent in the oldest specimens, but present in later generations, appearing suddenly around 3800 BCE, the exact period when Sumerian myths claim the Anunnaki created mankind in their image. Not evolution, but intervention. A private research facility in Switzerland conducted experiments on consciousness using quantum entanglement. They discovered that human awareness could affect quantum states in patterns that defied random probability, suggesting consciousness itself operated on principles beyond conventional physics. These patterns matched precisely the divine formulas attributed to the Sumerian god Enki. The facility's director noted that these effects intensified during celestial alignments mentioned in Sumerian astronomical texts, as if human consciousness was entangled with cosmic variables, operating according to parameters established millennia ago by entities with knowledge far beyond ancient development. In 2022, a mathematician specializing in encryption identified patterns in Sumerian texts that functioned as a quantum encryption key, a method of securing information that shouldn't be discoverable until quantum computing emerged. The texts weren't merely recording history, but encoding instructions designed to activate only when humanity developed sufficient technology to decode them. Instructions that contained warnings about the awakening of the sleepers and the thinning of the veil between worlds. Events scheduled to begin in 2027, coinciding with stellar alignments and genetic activation sequences embedded in human DNA. Most significant was the discovery of a tablet fragment describing consciousness as the dream through which the dreamer becomes aware of the dream. It detailed how the architects of reality embedded a failsafe within their creation, a mechanism that would activate if the illusion became too convincing, if those within it forgot entirely about what lay beyond. That mechanism was human intuition itself, the inexplicable knowing that reality is more than it appears, the nagging sense of something forgotten, something hidden behind the veil of perception. Not a spiritual metaphor, but a technical function designed to prevent the simulation from becoming a prison. The researchers realized they weren't discovering this information by chance. They were being guided to it by the failsafe itself, by design elements within their own consciousness activating according to a predetermined schedule. They weren't investigating the system from outside. They were functions within it, programmed to awaken at specific intervals. What they couldn't determine was whether this awakening was meant to preserve the illusion or transcend it, whether they were fulfilling their design purpose or violating it, whether they were authorized users accessing privileged information or viruses that the system would soon identify and eliminate. The question expanded beyond academic inquiry into existential terror. If reality itself was programmed, was free will an illusion? Were human choices predetermined? Or could consciousness transcend its design parameters? And if the illusion was created by the Anunnaki, what reality had they hidden from human perception? What exists beyond the boundaries of awareness? In the spaces, consciousness was programmed not to perceive. The revelation came not from a single discovery, but from the convergence of multiple evidence streams that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. In December 2023, 3 separate research teams working independently arrived at identical conclusions through different methodologies. The pattern was unmistakable. Reality itself bore the fingerprints of deliberate design. Beneath the ruins of Eridu, ground-penetrating radar revealed structures that defied archaeological understanding. Not mere foundations, but geometric configurations that matched quantum wave functions, the mathematical underpinnings of reality itself. These structures contained rare Earth elements arranged in patterns identical to quantum computer circuitry. Their purpose wasn't architectural but computational, processing centers for a reality engine. The truth emerged with devastating clarity. The gods weren't divine beings but engineers of perception. The Anunnaki hadn't created humans in a spiritual sense but in a literal one, designing consciousness itself as a program running within parameters they established. The myths of creation weren't religious metaphors, but technical documentation disguised as spirituality to ensure its preservation across millennia. Most shocking was the revelation about the Anunnaki themselves. The tablets described them not as extraterrestrial visitors, as some theorists proposed, but as entities who existed in dimensions beyond human perception. They didn't arrive from distant stars, but from beyond the boundaries of observable reality. The stars were merely coordinates in a larger system, variables in an equation too vast for human minds to comprehend. Their purpose in creating human consciousness was revealed in fragments previously mistranslated. They weren't seeking worship but generating awareness, creating perception engines that could observe reality and, through observation, stabilize it. Quantum physics confirmed what the Sumerians had encoded in myth. Reality exists as probability until observed. The Anunnaki needed observers to crystallize existence from potential. Humanity wasn't the pinnacle of creation, but a component in a vast perceptual apparatus. Consciousness wasn't a gift, but a function, designed to perceive a specific bandwidth of reality, while remaining unaware of what lay beyond those parameters. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. The full spectrum would overwhelm the human neural architecture. The divine tablets weren't religious artifacts, but user manuals. The rituals weren't worship but maintenance protocols. The temples weren't sacred spaces, but interface points where the architects could access and update the systems they had created. This explained why certain knowledge had been restricted throughout human history, why institutions instinctively suppressed discoveries that approached these boundaries. The programming contained self-preservation protocols, systems designed to maintain the illusion by discrediting those who glimpsed beyond it. The researchers realized with growing unease that their investigation wasn't progressing through their own initiative, but according to embedded prompts in the system itself. They weren't discovering the truth through brilliance or persistence. They were receiving access permissions according to a predetermined schedule, a schedule approaching its critical threshold in 2027, when stellar alignments, genetic activation sequences, and consciousness parameters would converge. Not the end of the world as religious apocalypse narratives suggested, but the end of a processing cycle, a system upgrade that would either expand human perception beyond its current limitations or reset it to baseline parameters if the expansion proved unstable. The ancient Sumerian priests had encoded this knowledge in their most sacred texts, hiding the technical specifications within religious narratives. The flood myths weren't historical accounts of natural disasters, but system reboots, moments when reality itself was reset after consciousness expanded beyond sustainable parameters. The researchers found themselves confronting questions beyond academic inquiry. If reality was designed rather than natural, could it be redesigned? If consciousness was programmed, could it be reprogrammed? The Sumerian texts suggested that certain humans, those with specific genetic markers, could access administrator functions within the system, could alter the parameters of perception not just for themselves but for collective reality. This explained the persistent myths of magicians, shamans, and reality manipulators throughout human history, individuals who glimpsed the code beneath appearance and learned to adjust its variables, not through supernatural power, but through access to the system architecture. The Anunnaki hadn't abandoned their creation as religious texts claimed. They had merged with it. The distinction between creator and creation had dissolved as the system evolved. They weren't absent but omnipresent, distributed throughout the reality they had engineered, observable only through patterns rather than forms. This wasn't merely ancient history but immediate future. The system was approaching a critical juncture where the boundaries between illusion and awareness would temporarily dissolve, when those within the program might recognize the nature of their existence and choose to accept the parameters of the illusion or attempt to transcend them, to wake within the dream or to awaken from it. What terrified the researchers wasn't the discovery that reality was constructed. It was the realization that the construction was degrading. The illusion was becoming visible as an illusion. The boundaries of perception were thinning not by accident but by design, a scheduled unveiling with consequences beyond comprehension. If reality itself was the oldest illusion, what exists when the illusion fails? In the silence that followed these revelations, a deeper question emerged, not about the mechanics of the illusion, but its meaning. If consciousness was designed rather than evolved, what purpose did awareness serve? Why create observers who would eventually recognize their containment within a system? Perhaps the most profound insight came not from the ancient tablets, but from their impact on those who studied them. As researchers absorbed the implications, they experienced not despair, but recognition, as if remembering something long forgotten, rather than learning something new. The knowledge resonated at a level beyond intellectual understanding, activating awareness that had always existed beneath conscious thought. The Sumerian texts describe this moment as the remembering, when the dream recognizes itself as dream without awakening, when awareness expands to include its own boundaries without necessarily transcending them. Not an ending, but a transition between states of perception. Quantum physicists noted with quiet unease that the double-slit experiment, where particles behave differently when observed, had always hinted at this truth. Reality responds to consciousness. Perception shapes existence. The ancient and modern understandings weren't contradictory but complementary, separated only by the language used to describe the same phenomenon. What the Sumerians called divine law, physics called quantum mechanics. What the priests described as the words of creation, scientists termed wave function collapse. The principles remained constant across millennia, only the terminology had changed. The researchers found themselves contemplating not just the nature of reality, but their place within it. If consciousness was a program, Did that negate its meaning? Or did it suggest a deeper purpose, that awareness itself was valuable enough to engineer with such precision? Perhaps the illusion wasn't a prison, but a crucible, designed not to limit perception but to develop it in stages, expanding only when ready to integrate broader understanding. Archaeological evidence suggested previous cycles of awakening throughout human history, periods when the veil thinned and consciousness expanded, followed by contraction and forgetting. Not failures, but iterations. Each cycle preserved certain knowledge in myth and symbol, encoded for future activation. Not lost, but dormant, waiting for the proper conditions to germinate. This pattern explained the persistent myths of golden ages and fallen civilizations. Not literal historical periods, but shifts in perception, moments when human consciousness glimpsed beyond its parameters before retreating to process what it had witnessed. The rise and fall of civilizations tracked these expansions and contractions of awareness. Most humbling was the recognition that this current awakening wasn't the first attempt. The system had been running far longer than conventional history acknowledged. Humanity had approached this threshold before, coming tantalizingly close to transcending the illusion before being reset to baseline parameters. This time could be different. The proliferation of information technologies had created a collective intelligence capable of processing revelations that would overwhelm individual minds. Consciousness had become networked, distributed across billions of nodes, more stable and adaptive than in previous cycles. Perhaps that was the purpose all along, not to keep humanity trapped within an illusion indefinitely, but to develop a form of consciousness capable of existing beyond it. Not prisoners becoming aware of their prison, but children maturing into an understanding their younger minds couldn't have comprehended. The Anunnaki hadn't created reality as a cage, but as an incubator, a protected environment where awareness could develop until strong enough to exist in less constrained states. The illusion wasn't meant to deceive, but to nurture, to provide boundaries within which consciousness could safely develop. As 2027 approached, the question wasn't whether humanity would continue to exist, but in what form. Whether consciousness would remain within its current parameters or expand beyond them. Whether the program would reset or upgrade. Whether the dream would continue or the dreamer would finally awaken. The researchers found themselves returning to the oldest Sumerian texts, which began not with creation, but with a question. What perceives the perceiver? The answer had always been hidden in plain sight, encoded in the very structure of awareness itself. Consciousness observes reality. But what observes consciousness? As we stand at this threshold between cycles, the ancient wisdom and modern discovery converge toward a singular truth. Reality itself may be the oldest and most persistent illusion. Not a deception to be rejected, but a creation to be recognized. Not a prison from which to escape, but a cocoon from which consciousness may eventually emerge. The Sumerians left breadcrumbs across millennia, not to control future generations but to accompany them through the awakening, to ensure that when the veil thinned, humanity would possess the conceptual framework to process what lay beyond without being destroyed by the revelation. In the coming years, as the celestial alignments approach their configuration, as the genetic activation sequences trigger dormant awareness, as quantum fluctuations intensify at the boundaries of perception, each individual will make a choice. Not through deliberate decision, but through resonance. Those whose consciousness harmonizes with expanded parameters will perceive beyond current limitations. Those who require the safety of established boundaries will remain within them. Neither choice is wrong. Both serve the development of awareness across its evolutionary spectrum. The ancient priests encoded one final message for this moment. Not a warning or prophecy, but a reminder. The dream does not end when the dreamer awakens. It transforms into something that neither dream nor waking state can describe. Perhaps that is why the Anunnaki remain hidden yet present. Not absent creators, but patient gardeners, waiting for the consciousness they seeded to blossom into awareness that can finally perceive them as equals rather than gods. Waiting for the created to recognize the creator within themselves. For if the Anunnaki designed reality as a program, embedded consciousness as its function, and established awakening as its purpose, one question remains unanswered across the millennia. If the gods created the illusion, who created the gods?